When 8-year-old Leah saw an old man sitting alone on a park bench, hungry and forgotten, she didn't think twice before offering him her peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It was just a small act of kindness, one she never expected to change anything. But the very next day, there was a knock at her door. When her mother opened it, 2 police officers stood on their doorstep, asking for Leah. What they revealed left her mother in shock and turned Leah's simple gesture into something far bigger than she could have ever imagined. The city bustled with the energy of 1,000 stories unfolding all at once. Skyscrapers stretched toward the sky, traffic hummed along the crowded streets, and the scent of roasted coffee beans mixed with the aroma of freshly baked bread from a corner cafe. In the midst of it all, nestled between rows of apartment buildings, sat Willow Park, a small but beloved retreat where families, joggers, and daydreamers found solace from the constant movement of city life. This was Leah Carter's favorite place, a haven where she could skip along the pathways, chase squirrels with wild abandon, and watch the golden sunlight filter through the rustling leaves. Leah, an 8-year-old with curly dark hair and bright, curious eyes, was skipping along the cobbled walkway that led to the park's playground. She had just finished her day at school, and her pink backpack bounced against her small frame as she moved. She always looked forward to these moments of freedom, a brief respite before heading home to their tiny apartment where her mother, Sophia, would soon return from her long shift at the hospital. As she neared the playground, something caught Leah's attention. Just beyond the row of swings, near an old wooden bench, sat an older man. His clothes were layered and worn, a tattered brown coat draped over his shoulders despite the warmth of the afternoon. His face was lined with the creases of age, his scruffy white beard uneven and unkempt. He sat hunched over, staring at the ground, his hands tucked into his sleeves as if trying to conserve what little warmth he had. Leah slowed her steps, curiosity replacing the excitement she'd felt moments ago. She had seen homeless people before, but something about this man was different. He wasn't holding a sign, wasn't asking for money or food. He simply sat there, still and quiet, as if he had blended into the background of the park. People walked past him without a glance, as if he were invisible. She hesitated for a moment, glancing around to see if anyone else had noticed him. But no one did. The mothers pushing their strollers, the joggers with earbuds in their ears, the kids laughing near the slides, none of them paid any attention to the old man sitting alone on the bench. Leah felt a strange tug in her heart. Without thinking much more about it, she unzipped her backpack and pulled out her peanut butter and jelly sandwich. It was her favorite treat, something her mother always packed with care. But right now, she wasn't hungry. Someone else needed it more. Clutching the sandwich in her small hands, she walked over to the bench, her footsteps light but purposeful. As she neared the man, she hesitated, suddenly unsure of what to say. He hadn't noticed her yet, his gaze still fixed on the ground. Taking a deep breath, she spoke up. "Excuse me, sir," she said, her voice soft but clear. "Would you like my sandwich?" The man startled slightly, as if pulled from a deep thought. Slowly, he lifted his gaze, and Leah was met with a pair of tired blue eyes. There was surprise in them, followed by something else, something she couldn't quite place. For a moment, he just looked at her, as if trying to decide whether she was real. Then, his expression softened, and his lips parted slightly, as though he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. Leah smiled at him, extending the sandwich toward him again. "It's really good. My mom makes the best peanut butter and jelly." The man's hands trembled slightly as he reached out. He hesitated once more before finally taking the sandwich, his fingers curling around the plastic-wrapped meal as if he were holding something precious. "Thank you," he murmured, his voice hoarse. "My name is Robert. But most people just call me Bob." Leah beamed. "Nice to meet you, Bob. I'm Leah." Bob unwrapped the sandwich carefully, as though afraid it might disappear if he moved too fast. He took a small bite, chewing slowly, savoring the taste. Leah watched him, feeling a warmth spread through her chest. It wasn't much, just a sandwich, but the look on his face made her feel as though she had given him something far greater. "You remind me of someone," Bob said after a moment, his voice quieter now, almost as if he were speaking to himself. "Someone I knew a long time ago." Leah tilted her head. "Who?" Bob let out a soft chuckle, though there was sadness in it. "I don't remember," he admitted. "But something about you, it's familiar." Leah thought about that for a moment but didn't know what to say. Instead, she swung her legs back and forth, sitting beside him on the bench. They sat in comfortable silence, Leah watching the kids on the playground while Bob finished the sandwich, his posture relaxing ever so slightly. After a while, she checked the time on the watch her mother had given her. It was getting late. "I have to go home now," she said, standing up. Bob nodded, folding the sandwich wrapper neatly in his lap. "Thank you again, Leah. You didn't have to do this." She shrugged. "I wanted to." As she walked away, she glanced back one last time. Bob was still sitting there, but this time, he wasn't staring at the ground. He was watching the children play, his eyes no longer as dull as they had been before. Leah skipped home, her heart feeling lighter than it had in a long time. She didn't know that her small act of kindness had already set something much greater in motion, something that would soon change both their lives forever. Leah skipped the entire way home, her heart still light from the encounter with Bob. She had always been told to be kind, but she had never felt kindness fill her the way it did today. It was strange, really, how something as simple as giving away a sandwich could make her feel as if she had done something truly important. Her neighborhood was a stark contrast to the quiet retreat of Willow Park. The apartment buildings stood tall and close together, their faded brickwork a testament to years of wear. Some of the balconies had laundry hanging over the rails, while others held potted plants that residents tended to with care. Despite its rough exterior, Leah loved their neighborhood. She knew the people here, Ms. Green, who owned the tiny grocery store downstairs, Mr. Rodriguez, who always sat on his stoop playing his guitar, and even Mrs. Patel, who scolded kids for running too loudly but secretly gave them sweets when no one was watching. Reaching the third floor, Leah fished the spare key from her backpack and let herself into their small apartment. The scent of lavender, from the air freshener her mother always kept near the door, greeted her. The space was modest but warm, a small living room with a slightly worn couch, a tiny kitchen, and 2 bedrooms. On the refrigerator, held up by a magnet, was a note from her mother. "Working late again, sweetheart. Dinner is in the fridge. Love you, Mom." Leah wasn't surprised. Her mother, Sophia, was a nurse, and long shifts were part of the job. Leah had grown used to it. She set her backpack down and grabbed a juice box from the fridge before settling onto the couch, thinking about Bob. Had he eaten today before she gave him the sandwich? Where did he sleep at night? Did he have anyone who cared about him? The sound of keys jingling in the lock made her sit up. A moment later, Sophia stepped inside, looking exhausted but smiling nonetheless. Her brown hair was pulled into a bun, and dark circles rested beneath her kind eyes. "Hey, baby," Sophia greeted, setting her purse down and stretching. "Did you have a good day at school?" Leah nodded eagerly. "Yeah, but something really cool happened after school." Sophia raised an eyebrow, kicking off her shoes and settling onto the couch beside her daughter. "Oh? What happened?" Leah took a deep breath and launched into the story, recounting every detail about Bob, the way he sat alone on the bench, how he seemed invisible to everyone, and how his face lit up when she gave him the sandwich. She spoke animatedly, her hands gesturing as she described their short but meaningful conversation. As Leah spoke, Sophia's smile faltered, concern creeping into her features. She listened carefully, her nurse's instincts immediately kicking in. A strange man, alone in the park? Her daughter sitting with him, talking, sharing food? Leah saw the slight shift in her mother's expression and hesitated. "Mom? Are you mad?" Sophia let out a slow breath and shook her head. "I'm not mad, sweetheart. But, Leah, you have to be careful around strangers. You don't know who they are or what their intentions might be." "But Bob was nice," Leah insisted. "He didn't ask me for anything. I wanted to help him. He was just lonely." Sophia reached over, tucking a stray curl behind Leah's ear. "I know your heart is in the right place, baby. And I love that about you. But the world isn't always kind in return. Some people," she hesitated, choosing her words carefully. "Some people have been hurt so much that they don't know how to accept kindness. And others might take advantage of it." Leah frowned. "But if we don't help, who will?" Sophia sighed, rubbing her temples. She wanted to protect Leah from the harsh realities of the world, but she also didn't want to crush her daughter's compassionate spirit. It was a delicate balance, teaching her to be kind without being naive, generous without being careless. "I'm proud of you," Sophia finally said. "I really am. But promise me that next time, if you want to help someone, you tell me first. Okay? Leah nodded reluctantly. Okay. Sophia studied her daughter for a moment, then pulled her into a hug. Leah melted into her mother's embrace, feeling the warmth and security she had always known. She understood her mother's worry, but she also couldn't shake the feeling that what she did for Bob had been the right thing. Later that evening, as they sat at the small dining table eating reheated spaghetti, Leah couldn't stop thinking about Bob. "Mom," she asked suddenly, twirling her fork in her noodles. "Where do people like Bob go when it gets really cold outside?" Sophia hesitated. "There are shelters, baby. Places where people without homes can sleep. But sometimes, they're full. And sometimes, people don't want to go there." Leah frowned. "Why wouldn't they want to go if it's cold? Some of them feel safer on their own," Sophia explained gently. "And some of them don't trust the system. It's complicated." Leah thought about that as she chewed her food. Bob hadn't looked dangerous. He had looked tired. Lost. Like he had been waiting for something, or someone, to notice him. "Can I see him again?" Leah asked. Sophia sighed. "I don't know, sweetheart. Maybe. But only if I come with you." Leah nodded, satisfied with that compromise. That night, as she curled up under her blankets, she couldn't help but wonder about Bob. Had he found somewhere warm to sleep? Did he have anyone who was looking for him? Had she done enough? As sleep overtook her, she had no idea that the small act of kindness she had shown that afternoon was about to change everything. And soon, the whole world would know her name. The morning sun filtered through the thin curtains in Leah's bedroom, casting a warm glow over the small space. The room was simple, painted a soft shade of blue with a few posters of animals taped to the walls. Her bookshelf, slightly worn at the edges, was stacked with colorful books, some of which had been read over and over again. At the foot of her bed sat a stuffed bear, worn from years of love and companionship. Leah stirred beneath her blankets as the sound of clinking dishes drifted in from the kitchen. The comforting aroma of coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of lavender from the air freshener her mother always kept near the front door. Yawning, she stretched her arms before climbing out of bed, her feet landing on the cool wooden floor. As she padded into the kitchen, she saw her mother, Sophia, standing at the counter, dressed in her usual blue scrubs. Sophia turned when she heard Leah's footsteps, smiling warmly. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said, handing Leah a glass of orange juice. Leah took a sip, rubbing her eyes. "Morning, Mom. Are you going to work today?" Sophia nodded. "Just for a few hours. I have a shorter shift today, so I'll be home earlier." Leah's face lit up. "Can we go back to the park later? I want to see if Bob is there." Sophia hesitated, biting her lip. "Leah." I know, Leah interrupted, her voice filled with impatience. "I have to be careful. But you'll be with me this time?" Sophia sighed. "We'll see, okay?" Leah didn't push further. She knew when her mother said "we'll see," it meant there was at least a small chance, and that was good enough for now. As they ate their breakfast, there was a sudden, unexpected knock at the front door. It was firm but not aggressive, the kind of knock that came from someone who meant business. Sophia glanced at Leah before wiping her hands on a kitchen towel and walking toward the door. Leah followed close behind, curiosity prickling at her senses. When Sophia opened the door, she was met with two police officers standing in the dimly lit hallway. Their uniforms were crisp, their expressions unreadable. One officer, a woman with short brown hair, offered a polite nod. "Good morning," she said. "Are you Sophia Carter?" Sophia's grip on the doorknob tightened slightly. "Yes. Can I help you?" The second officer, a tall man with graying hair, spoke next. "We're here about your daughter, Leah Carter." At the mention of her name, Leah's stomach twisted into knots. She wasn't in trouble, was she? Sophia's posture stiffened protectively. "What about her?" The female officer offered a reassuring smile. "She's not in trouble. We just need to ask her a few questions about an interaction she had yesterday in Willow Park." Sophia's eyes flickered with concern as she stepped aside, allowing the officers to enter. Leah's heart pounded as she followed her mother to the living room, sitting on the couch while the officers took a seat across from them. The male officer cleared his throat. "Leah, we understand that you spoke with a man in the park yesterday. An older gentleman. Can you tell us about him?" Leah blinked, her mind immediately jumping to Bob. How did they know about him? "His name is Bob," she said carefully. Well, actually, he said his name was Robert. I gave him my sandwich because he looked hungry. The officers exchanged a glance before the woman leaned forward slightly. Leah, we believe that man is Robert Ellis Montgomery. Does that name sound familiar to you? Leah shook her head. Sophia frowned. Who is Robert Montgomery? The male officer sighed. He was a businessman, a very wealthy one. He disappeared over a year ago after suffering a traumatic accident. His family has been searching for him ever since. He was declared missing. Sophia's eyes widened. Missing? You mean, she turned to Leah, realization dawning in her expression. The man Leah met in the park is a missing person, the officer confirmed. Leah's head spun. Bob, Robert, wasn't just a homeless man? He had a family? A life before this? He didn't seem to remember anything, Leah said slowly. He just said I reminded him of someone, but he didn't know who. The officers nodded. That makes sense. His accident caused severe memory loss. The fact that he even recalled part of his name is a huge breakthrough. Your kindness may have triggered something in his memory. Leah's hands clenched together in her lap. So, what happens now? The female officer gave her a small, reassuring smile. His family has been notified. They're eager to meet you. Sophia's protective instincts immediately flared. Meet her? Why? The officer softened her tone. Your daughter did something incredible. She unknowingly helped reconnect a family with their missing loved one. The Montgomerys are extremely grateful and would like to thank Leah personally. Sophia was silent for a long moment. Leah could tell she was thinking, processing, deciding whether this was safe, whether this was something she wanted to involve Leah in. Leah, however, was brimming with questions. Does he have kids? A wife? The officers exchanged another look. No children, no spouse. But he does have parents who have been desperately searching for him. And a younger sister? Sophia exhaled, running a hand over her face. This is a lot to take in. We understand, the officer said kindly. And you are under no obligation to meet them if you're uncomfortable. But if you choose to, we can arrange a safe meeting with them. Leah looked at her mother, hopeful. Mom, can we? I want to see if Bob, Robert, remembers more. Sophia hesitated before sighing. Let me think about it. The officers stood, sensing the conversation was coming to a close. Take your time, the male officer said. Here's our card. Let us know if you'd like to move forward with a meeting. Sophia took the card, glancing at it briefly before nodding. Thank you. The officers gave Leah a small smile before leaving the apartment, the door clicking shut behind them. For a long moment, silence filled the room. Then Sophia turned to Leah, rubbing her temples. I can't believe this, she muttered. Leah bit her lip. Mom, this is a good thing, right? Sophia looked at her daughter, at the hopeful spark in her eyes. She sighed again, shaking her head with a small smile. I don't know, baby. But I think we just got pulled into something bigger than either of us expected. Leah nodded, her heart pounding with excitement and nervousness. She had no idea what meeting Robert's family would be like, but she knew one thing for sure, her small act of kindness had started something much bigger than she had ever imagined. The news spread through the neighborhood like wildfire. Within hours of the police visit, whispers filled the hallways of their apartment building, and by the next day, nearly everyone in their small community had heard about Leah's encounter with Robert Montgomery. It started with Ms. Green, the owner of the small grocery store downstairs, who had overheard the conversation between Sophia and one of her co-workers at the hospital. By the time Leah walked to school the next morning, she noticed people glancing at her more than usual, some with admiration, others with suspicion. When she stepped into the classroom, her best friend Jasmine was already at their desk, waiting for her. Leah, Jasmine whispered excitedly as Leah took her seat. Is it true? Did you really find a missing rich guy? Leah frowned. I didn't find him. I just gave him my sandwich. But it was him, right? Robert Montgomery? I heard my dad talking about it last night. He said the guy disappeared over a year ago, and no one knew where he was. And then you, just some kid, helped bring him back. Leah squirmed in her seat. She wasn't sure how to explain it. It hadn't been some heroic act, it had just been kindness. She didn't feel like she had found Robert. She had just sat next to a lonely man and shared her lunch. I guess, she muttered. Jasmine grinned. That's crazy. I mean, you're, like, famous now. Leah's stomach twisted at the word. She hadn't thought of it like that. But not everyone in class seemed to see her actions the same way. During lunch, as she was unpacking her food, she overheard a group of kids whispering at the next table. She just did it for attention, one girl said, rolling her eyes. My mom says her mom is probably hoping for a reward, a boy added. That Montgomery guy is super rich. Leah's face burned. She clenched her hands under the table, suddenly losing her appetite. Jasmine must have heard it too because she turned around, glaring. That's not true, she snapped. The kid snickered but didn't say anything more. Leah lowered her eyes. This was supposed to be a good thing, wasn't it? Why were people saying such mean things? When she got home that evening, the whispers continued. Their next-door neighbor, Mr. Delgado, gave Sophia a long look as she unlocked their apartment door. So, I heard about your daughter's little story, he said, crossing his arms. Big news, huh? Sophia stiffened. I suppose so. Well, he said, nodding slowly, it's not every day that someone from around here gets a chance to be noticed by people like them. Leah peeked around her mother, unsure what he meant by them. But the way he said it made her uncomfortable. We're not looking for attention, Sophia said, her tone clipped. Sure, Mr. Delgado replied, smirking. Just don't forget where you came from when they start inviting you into their fancy world. Sophia exhaled through her nose and ushered Leah inside before she could hear any more. That night, over dinner, Sophia was quiet. Leah poked at her mashed potatoes, not sure if she should say something. Finally, she couldn't take the silence anymore. Mom, she asked hesitantly. Sophia looked up, her face tired. Yeah, baby. Are people mad at us? Sophia sighed, setting her fork down. Not mad, she said carefully. Just, people talk, Leah. When something unexpected happens, they start making their own stories about it. But why? I didn't do anything wrong. No, you didn't, Sophia said, giving her a small smile. But some people see things differently. Some think we're lucky to be noticed by someone rich. Others think we're trying to take advantage of it. Leah frowned. That's not fair. It's not, Sophia agreed. But that's how the world works sometimes. Leah was quiet for a moment before asking, do you think we should still meet them? Sophia hesitated. I don't know, sweetheart. I don't want you to feel like we have to do anything we don't want to do just because people expect it. Leah thought about Robert, how sad he had looked, how he had said she reminded him of someone. I think we should, Leah said firmly. It's not about what people say. It's about Bob. Sophia studied her daughter for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, she said. We'll call the officers tomorrow. The decision was made. They would meet the Montgomery family. But Leah had no idea just how much this choice would change everything. The next day, Sophia made the call. Leah sat beside her, swinging her legs as her mother spoke to the officers, confirming the meeting. Though she couldn't hear the full conversation, she could tell that her mother was cautious, her tone firm yet polite. Sophia asked questions, where the meeting would take place, who would be there, and how long it would last. When she finally hung up, she turned to Leah with a mixture of hesitation and resolve. They want us to meet at the Montgomery estate tomorrow afternoon, Sophia said, running a hand over her forehead. It's in Grinnell? Leah's eyes widened. Grinnell was an entirely different world from where they lived. While their apartment building was old and crowded, Grinnell was full of enormous houses with perfectly trimmed hedges and long driveways. She had only seen it once when her class went on a field trip to a museum nearby. Even then, she had felt out of place just driving through. Are we really going? Leah asked. Sophia nodded, though she didn't look completely convinced. Yes. But we're going as ourselves, Leah. No pretending. No acting like we're someone we're not. Leah grinned. I don't know how to pretend to be anything else. Sophia sighed but smiled, pulling Leah into a hug. I know, baby. And that's what I love about you. The next day, they got ready early. Sophia chose a simple blue blouse and black slacks, something neat but not extravagant. Leah put on a yellow dress, her favorite, and her small white sneakers. As they waited for the cab, Sophia checked her reflection in the hallway mirror, smoothing down her blouse. Leah could tell she was nervous. You look nice, Mom, Leah reassured her. Sophia chuckled. Thanks, sweetheart. You do too. When the cab pulled up, Leah felt her stomach flutter. This was really happening. As they drove through the city, the buildings changed from tightly packed apartments and stores to sprawling houses with iron gates. When they finally arrived at the Montgomery estate, Leah's mouth dropped open. The house, no, the mansion, was enormous. It had tall windows, a grand entrance with white columns, and a garden that looked like it belonged in a storybook. Sophia paid the driver, then took Leah's hand. Ready? Leah nodded, though her excitement was mixed with nervousness. A butler opened the large wooden door, leading them inside. The entrance hall was bigger than their entire apartment. A large chandelier hung from the ceiling, and polished marble floors stretched in every direction. Leah had never seen anything like it. Before she could take it all in, A woman in a black dress and pearl earrings stepped forward, her eyes filled with emotion. "You must be Leah," she said, her voice warm but trembling. "And Miss Carter?" Sophia nodded. "Yes. And you are?" The woman placed a hand on her chest. "I'm Eleanor Montgomery, Robert's mother." Leah studied her. She had kind but tired eyes, like she hadn't slept in a long time. "Thank you for coming," Eleanor said softly. She stopped, taking a shaky breath. "We can't begin to tell you how grateful we are." Just then, another voice spoke from the hallway. "Is she here?" Leah turned just in time to see Robert, Bob, walking toward them. He looked different today. He was clean-shaven, his hair neatly combed, and he wore a button-up shirt instead of his worn-out coat. But his eyes were the same, curious and kind, with something unspoken behind them. When his gaze landed on Leah, he froze. "It's you," he murmured, almost in disbelief. Leah smiled. "Hi, Bob." He blinked, as if trying to process everything. Then, to everyone's surprise, his eyes filled with tears. Eleanor stepped closer, placing a gentle hand on his arm. "Robert, do you remember anything?" Robert swallowed hard. "Not everything," he admitted. "But, His eyes didn't leave Leah. "She reminds me of something, someone. A memory I can't quite reach." Leah tilted her head. "Who do I remind you of?" Robert shook his head, frustrated. "I don't know. It's like looking at a picture with a missing piece." Eleanor's husband, Richard Montgomery, stepped forward, his expression cautious but hopeful. "It's a start, son. And we have her to thank for it." Leah shifted uncomfortably as all eyes landed on her. She hadn't done anything special, just shared a sandwich. But to them, it seemed like she had unlocked something in Robert's mind that even doctors hadn't been able to. Sophia, sensing her daughter's discomfort, cleared her throat. "We're happy to help, but we're not sure how much more we can do." Eleanor nodded quickly. "Of course. We don't expect anything from you. We'd love for Robert to spend some time with Leah. Maybe it'll help him remember." Sophia hesitated. "I don't know." Robert suddenly looked at her. "Please," he said softly. "I don't want to forget again." Something in his voice made Sophia pause. After a moment, she let out a slow breath. "All right? But under my watch." A look of relief crossed Eleanor's face. "Thank you." Leah didn't know what would happen next. But as Robert sat down beside her, she saw something shift in his eyes, like a part of him that had been lost was beginning to find its way back. Maybe, just maybe, this was only the beginning. The afternoon stretched into evening as Leah and Robert sat together in the Montgomery estate's grand living room. The room was massive, with floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked an elegant garden. A grand piano sat in one corner, untouched yet gleaming under the golden light of the chandelier. The room felt so different from Leah's small apartment, quieter, too polished, almost like something out of a movie. Robert sat across from Leah, his hands clasped together, staring at her as if she held a missing piece of his past. Every now and then, he would shake his head slightly, as if trying to grasp onto a thought that kept slipping away. "You really don't remember anything?" Leah asked curiously. Robert sighed, rubbing his forehead. "Bits and pieces. Flashes of something familiar but nothing I can hold on to. It's like a puzzle with missing pieces, and I don't know where to find them." Leah frowned, thinking. "Maybe if we do something you used to like, it'll help?" Eleanor, who had been sitting quietly nearby, perked up. "That's not a bad idea." She turned to Robert. "Do you remember anything you used to enjoy?" Robert hesitated, his brows furrowed. After a long pause, he murmured, "I used to go to the park a lot. Before everything happened." Leah's face lit up. "Willow Park. That's where I met you." Robert's gaze flickered with recognition. "Yes, but I think there was another park. A different one. I just can't remember where." Eleanor exchanged a glance with her husband, Richard, who had been listening quietly. "There was a park we used to visit often when you were younger," Richard said. "Grenell Park, near the old family home." Leah's curiosity deepened. "Maybe if we go there, it'll help you remember more." Sophia, who had been listening cautiously the entire time, finally spoke up. "Leah, I don't know if..." But Robert cut in, his voice more certain than before. "I'd like to go." He turned to his parents. "Maybe it'll help?" Eleanor hesitated, her protective nature making her wary, but the hopeful look in Robert's eyes softened her expression. "All right," she said carefully. "We can try." Leah grinned, excited at the idea that maybe, just maybe, she could help Bob, Robert, find the missing pieces of himself. The next morning, Eleanor arranged for a private driver to take them all to Grenell Park. Leah couldn't believe how much effort the Montgomerys were putting into helping Robert regain his memory. It was strange to think that just a few days ago, he had been sitting on a park bench with no idea who he was, and now, here they were, heading back to a place that might help him remember. Grenell Park was beautiful. It was bigger than Willow Park, with a grand entrance, wide open spaces, and a large pond at the center where ducks lazily swam. Unlike the small playground and benches in Leah's usual park, this one had neatly paved walkways lined with old oak trees and a wooden gazebo near the pond. Robert stepped out of the car and stood still, his eyes scanning the park slowly. Leah could see it, something in him was shifting, something deeper than just recognizing a place. "Does anything look familiar?" Richard asked gently. Robert took a slow step forward, his eyes flickering from the pond to the gazebo to the winding path beyond. He took another step, then another. Then suddenly, he stopped in front of a wooden bench, the kind that had a small plaque attached to it. Leah watched as Robert's hands trembled slightly when he reached out, brushing his fingers against the words engraved on the plaque. His breath hitched. Eleanor stepped closer. Robert swallowed hard, his voice barely above a whisper. "This is where I proposed." A hush fell over the group. Leah's eyes widened. "Proposed?" Robert turned toward his parents, confusion clouding his face. "I was engaged." Eleanor's hands flew to her mouth. "Oh, Robert." Richard exhaled, looking pained. "You don't remember her?" Robert's face twisted in frustration. "I don't know. He clenched his fists, his voice growing more strained. "I see flashes. A woman's face, but it's blurry. I remember sitting here. I remember feeling nervous. But I don't remember her." Leah bit her lip, glancing between Robert and his parents. "Maybe you will," she said softly. "Maybe you just need more time." Robert let out a shaky breath and nodded. "Maybe." That evening, back at the Montgomery estate, the atmosphere was quiet, thoughtful. Eleanor had gone to find old photos, hoping they would jog more of Robert's memory. Meanwhile, Leah and Sophia sat with Robert in the living room, the weight of the day still heavy. "You really changed everything for me, Leah," Robert said suddenly, looking at her with something like awe. Leah tilted her head. "Me?" Robert nodded. "If you hadn't given me that sandwich, I don't know if I'd even be here right now. I might still be sitting on that bench, lost." Leah shrugged. "It was just a sandwich." Robert smiled, shaking his head. "No. It was kindness. And that's something the world doesn't have enough of." Sophia, who had been quiet most of the evening, finally spoke. "That's true," she admitted. "Kindness can change a lot." Robert's expression grew thoughtful. "Then maybe that's what I need to do." Leah blinked. "What do you mean?" Robert turned to his parents, his face filled with new determination. "I want to do something. For people like me. For people who are lost, who have nowhere to go." Eleanor looked at him, surprised. "Robert, you've only just come back. You need time to heal." "I know," Robert said. "But I also know what it feels like to have no one, to feel invisible. And I don't want anyone else to feel that way." Sophia watched him carefully. "What are you thinking?" Robert exhaled, his jaw set. "A foundation. A place where people who have lost their way, whether from memory loss, trauma, or just bad luck, can get the help they need. A place for second chances." Richard looked thoughtful. "That's quite the idea." Leah grinned. "That sounds amazing." Robert nodded. "And it all started with one small act of kindness." Eleanor's eyes filled with emotion. "Robert." He turned to her. "I know it's a lot. But I think this is what I'm meant to do. It won't bring back all my memories, but maybe, just maybe, it'll give me purpose." Leah beamed. She had started this journey just wanting to help one person, and now, it seemed like that kindness was about to spread to so many more. And for the first time since this all began, she realized that maybe, just maybe, kindness was powerful enough to change the world. The Montgomery estate became a second home to Leah and Sophia in the following weeks. What had started as a simple meeting had now turned into regular visits, each one revealing more about Robert's past while also shaping his new future. His idea for a foundation, a place for those who had lost their way, became the topic of every conversation, with his parents both supporting and questioning the feasibility of it all. For Leah, stepping into the world of the Montgomerys was like entering a different universe. Everything was bigger, shinier, and far more formal than what she was used to. The halls of their home echoed with history, the furniture looked like it belonged in a museum, and the people who visited spoke in polished voices that carried the weight of old money. She was beginning to understand that the Montgomerys weren't just rich, they were powerful. One afternoon, as Leah and her mother arrived at the estate, they were greeted not just by Eleanor and Richard, but by a sharply dressed woman with a clipboard. She had short blonde hair and a thin, assessing smile. "This is Victoria Langford," Eleanor introduced, placing a gentle hand on Leah's back as they stepped inside. "She's a public relations consultant. She's been working with us to help handle Robert's return." Leah frowned. "Handle?" Victoria chuckled lightly, crouching slightly to Leah's level. "Sweetheart, your act of kindness has captured the city's attention. People are talking. The news, the papers, even social media. They all want to know more about the little girl who helped bring back Robert Montgomery." Sophia stiffened beside Leah. "We're not looking for attention," she said, her voice firm. Victoria straightened, nodding in understanding. "Of course. But it's not about looking for it, it's about managing it." She turned toward Robert, who had just entered the room. "You, especially, Mr. Montgomery, are now a story the public is eager to follow. Your disappearance, your return, it's compelling. And your idea for a foundation? Even more so." Robert rubbed the back of his neck. "I don't really care about publicity." Victoria smiled, unfazed. "That may be, but whether you care or not, people are talking. And the more they talk, the more impact you can have. If you want this foundation to succeed, you'll need the right image." Sophia exhaled through her nose. "This is starting to sound like some kind of performance." Victoria's gaze remained neutral. "It's not. It's about ensuring the right narrative is told before the wrong one takes over." Leah listened, unsure of what to make of it all. She had never cared about news or fame, and she certainly didn't think of what she did as something worthy of attention. It was just a sandwich. Just a conversation. But now, standing in this grand house with people talking about narratives and image management, she was starting to realize that this was bigger than she had imagined. Eleanor, sensing the tension, placed a gentle hand on Sophia's arm. "We're not asking for anything from you," she reassured her. "But we do want to be prepared for what's to come." Sophia looked at Leah, then at Robert. After a long moment, she sighed. "All right. But I don't want Leah being pushed into anything she's uncomfortable with." Victoria nodded. "Of course." Robert glanced at Leah, offering her a small, apologetic smile. "I know this must be strange for you," he said gently. Leah nodded. "A little." Robert exhaled. "For me too." That night, Leah lay in bed, staring at the ceiling of her small room. The day had left her with more questions than answers. Why did people care so much? Why did a simple act of kindness have to turn into a story? And what did this mean for her and her mom? She thought about Robert, how he had gone from being invisible on a park bench to suddenly being someone again. Maybe that was what made people interested. The idea that someone could disappear and then matter again. But didn't he always matter? Didn't everyone? Leah wasn't sure what tomorrow would bring, but she knew one thing for certain: she didn't want this to become something fake. She didn't want to be part of a story that wasn't real. And as she drifted off to sleep, she silently hoped that the kindness she had shown that day in the park wouldn't get lost in all the noise. The first time Leah saw her face on a television screen, she was sitting on the couch, eating cereal. She had been flipping through channels when a news anchor's voice caught her attention. The young girl whose simple act of kindness helped bring Robert Montgomery back to his family. Leah nearly choked on her spoonful of cereal as her own picture, one taken outside the Montgomery estate when they had visited, flashed across the screen. She barely had time to process it before her mother, Sophia, rushed into the living room, snatching the remote from Leah's hands and switching off the TV. "Oh no," Sophia muttered, rubbing her forehead. "This is exactly what I didn't want." Leah sat frozen, the excitement she had initially felt twisting into something heavier. "Mom," she asked quietly, "why are they talking about me?" Sophia sighed, sitting beside her. "Because people love a story, sweetheart. And right now, you're part of one." The news coverage didn't stop there. Later that day, Leah overheard Ms. Green, the owner of the small grocery store downstairs, talking to a customer about her. "I heard the Montgomerys are going to make her the face of their charity," Ms. Green said, placing a bag of oranges into the customer's basket. "Can you believe it? A girl from our neighborhood, in their world? Makes you wonder what they're getting out of it. The words made Leah's stomach twist. She hurried past the store, her small hands clenched at her sides. Later, as she walked into school, she heard the whispers. She's just lucky. She's only getting attention because the guy was rich. I bet they're giving her money for it. Leah kept her head down, slipping into her classroom as quickly as she could. She had never minded being noticed before, but now, all the attention felt wrong. At lunch, she sat beside Jasmine, who had been the only one acting normal. You okay? Jasmine asked, chewing on a carrot stick. Leah poked at her sandwich. I don't know. Everyone's acting weird. It's like they think I did something bad. Jasmine scoffed. People are just jealous. You didn't do anything except be nice. Leah sighed. I wish people would stop talking about it. Jasmine shrugged. They'll move on eventually. Just ignore them. Leah tried. But ignoring the whispers became harder as the week went on. By the time Saturday rolled around, Sophia had had enough. We're taking a break from all of this, she announced over breakfast. No Montgomerys, no press, no talking about what happened. Just a normal weekend, like we used to have. Leah smiled, relieved. Can we go to the park? Sophia nodded. Sure. Just Willow Park. No surprises. The plan seemed perfect, until they actually arrived at the park. Leah had expected peace, a chance to just be herself again. But as she skipped down the familiar cobblestone path, she noticed something that made her heart sink. People were staring. Some whispered. Others simply looked at her like she was something unusual, something to be observed. Then, a voice cut through the air. She's the one from TV. Leah turned to see a woman pointing at her, nudging the man beside her. Sophia immediately stepped closer, placing a protective hand on Leah's shoulder. Let's go, she murmured, steering her toward a quieter part of the park. Leah's cheeks burned. It was like she wasn't a normal girl anymore, just a story people talked about. She kicked a rock as they walked, frustration bubbling inside her. I didn't ask for this, she muttered. Sophia sighed. I know, baby. I know. They sat on a quiet bench, watching the ducks paddle in the small pond. For a moment, it was peaceful. Then, someone else approached. It was a woman Leah didn't recognize, middle-aged, wearing a simple but neat dress. She had a cautious look on her face, like she wasn't sure if she should be there. I'm sorry to bother you, the woman said, her voice gentle. I just wanted to say, what you did was really beautiful. Leah blinked. What? The woman smiled. My brother was homeless for a long time. I wish someone had been kind to him the way you were to Robert Montgomery. Maybe things would have turned out differently. Sophia softened. I'm sorry about your brother. The woman nodded, glancing at Leah. Don't let people make you feel bad for doing the right thing. Then, without another word, she walked away, leaving Leah sitting in stunned silence. Sophia rubbed her daughter's back. You see, sweetheart? Not all the attention is bad. Leah swallowed. But I don't want to be famous. I just wanted to help. Sophia smiled. Then just keep being yourself. The rest will fade eventually. Leah wasn't sure she believed that. But as she watched the ducks bob on the water, she felt something else, a quiet pride. Maybe Jasmine was right. Maybe people would move on. And maybe, just maybe, what she had done really had mattered. The next few weeks passed in a blur. Despite the unwanted attention, Leah and Sophia continued visiting the Montgomery estate, helping Robert adjust to his new reality. The foundation he had envisioned, the one inspired by Leah's simple act of kindness, was no longer just an idea. It was becoming real. Meetings were held, locations were scouted, and plans were drawn up for the very first kindness center, a place where people like Robert, those who had lost their way, could find shelter, meals, and support. At first, it all felt distant to Leah, like something too big to comprehend. But when Robert and his family invited her and her mother to the grand opening of the center, she realized just how much had changed because of one small moment in the park. On the day of the event, Leah stood in front of a large brick building with a blue and white sign that read the Leah Carter Kindness Center. She blinked, stunned. Wait, she said, turning to Robert. My name is on it. Robert smiled. Of course. You started all of this. Leah's face burned. But I didn't do anything. You did all the work. Robert shook his head. You did more than you know, Leah. She looked up at the sign again, still not sure how she felt about it. But before she could think too much, a crowd began to form. People from all over the city had come, some curious, some supportive, and some skeptical. The press was there too, cameras flashing, reporters murmuring to each other. It made Leah's stomach twist. Sophia must have noticed because she gently took Leah's hand. "Just breathe, baby. We'll get through this together." Leah nodded, gripping her mother's hand tighter. Eleanor and Richard Montgomery stood near Robert, greeting guests and shaking hands with officials who had come to support the foundation. Leah watched as wealthy donors and city officials chatted among themselves, nodding approvingly at the building. Then, something unexpected happened. A group of people began approaching, people who looked nothing like the polished guests in suits and dresses. They were men and women wearing layers of clothing, carrying bags and backpacks. Some had tired eyes, others looked wary. Homeless people. Realizing what was happening, Robert stepped forward, his face lighting up. "Welcome," he said warmly, gesturing toward the building. "Come inside." The well-dressed guests fell silent, watching. Some looked uncertain, a few even uncomfortable. Leah's heart pounded. This was what the center was meant for. Not for the people in suits. Not for the politicians. But for them, the people who had been ignored, forgotten, just like Robert had been. One man, older and thin with a graying beard, hesitated. "Is this really for us?" Robert nodded. "Yes. That's why we built it." The man stepped forward cautiously, glancing at Leah. "I heard about you," he said. "You're the little girl who gave that man a sandwich." Leah swallowed. Yeah." He studied her, then smiled, small, but genuine. "Good kid." Leah felt her cheeks warm. "Thanks." The moment passed quickly as Robert led the newcomers inside, showing them the facility. There was a dining hall where warm meals would be served daily, a row of small rooms for those who needed shelter, and an area where volunteers would help people apply for jobs and housing. As Leah followed them inside, she couldn't help but notice the expressions on the wealthier guests' faces. Some of them seemed moved, others uncertain. A few were clearly uncomfortable. Sophia leaned down, whispering in Leah's ear. "Some people like the idea of helping, but they don't always want to see the reality of it." Leah frowned. "That's dumb." Sophia chuckled. "It is. But kindness isn't about making them comfortable. It's about doing what's right." Leah looked around the center, watching as the people who had once been invisible were now being seen. Given a place. Given help. She straightened her shoulders. She hadn't asked for attention. She hadn't wanted to be a story. But standing here, seeing what had come from that one small act, she knew one thing. This was bigger than her. And she was proud to be part of it. The excitement of the kindness center's opening faded quickly as reality set in. Running a foundation was harder than Robert had imagined. There were permits to finalize, paperwork to process, and funding to secure. At first, donations came in steadily, thanks to the Montgomery name and the media attention surrounding the grand opening. But as the weeks passed, interest waned. Leah noticed it, too. The reporters who had once swarmed the center stopped showing up. The guests who had clapped at the opening ceremony returned to their busy lives. Even the murmurs at school died down. People moved on. But the people coming to the kindness center? They didn't stop. Every day, more men and women arrived, looking for shelter, food, and a place to start over. Robert, Eleanor, and a handful of volunteers worked tirelessly, but the center wasn't running as smoothly as everyone had hoped. Then, the complaints started. "Some of these people aren't even trying to get better," a donor remarked during a board meeting. "They just want a free handout." "The city council is worried about vagrants lingering near the building," another added. "Residents nearby are starting to complain." Leah listened from the hallway, her small hands tightening into fists. Vagrants? Free handouts? Did these people think being homeless was something anyone chose? She knew Robert was struggling. The same man who had once sat alone on a park bench now spent long nights filling out paperwork, making calls, and trying to convince people that kindness was worth investing in. One afternoon, as Leah and Sophia arrived at the center, they found Robert sitting alone at one of the dining hall tables, staring at a stack of papers. He looked exhausted. Sophia frowned. "Robert? Are you okay?" Robert exhaled, rubbing his temples. "I don't know if this is working," he admitted. "The donations are slowing down, and the city is hesitant to give us more permits." Some of the wealthier donors are pulling back. Leah frowned. Why? Robert hesitated. They say, they don't like the way the center is attracting certain people to the area. Leah's stomach twisted. But that's the whole point, isn't it? To help them? Robert nodded tiredly. Yes. But some people only like the idea of kindness when it looks neat and easy. When it gets complicated, they get uncomfortable. Sophia sighed, placing a hand on Robert's shoulder. You knew this wouldn't be easy. I did, Robert said. But I thought people would care more. Leah crossed her arms. We can't stop now. Robert chuckled, though there was little humor in it. You make it sound simple. Leah tilted her head. Isn't it? Robert looked at her, surprised. Helping people isn't about what's easy, Leah continued. It's about what's right. Robert stared at her for a moment before shaking his head with a small smile. You know, you're a lot wiser than most adults I know. Leah grinned. I am pretty smart. Sophia rolled her eyes but smiled as well. Maybe you need to remind people why you started this, she suggested. The story caught their attention before. Maybe you need to tell them the next part. Robert sat back, considering. Maybe you're right. That night, he made a call to one of the reporters who had covered his return months ago. The next morning, an article appeared online. The Fight for Kindness, Robert Montgomery's mission to help the forgotten. It wasn't flashy, but it told the truth, the struggles, the pushback, and the reason why the center mattered. By the end of the week, the donations started trickling in again. Not from the wealthy elites who only cared about their reputation, but from everyday people who believed in the cause. The center wasn't perfect. The struggles weren't over. But Leah knew one thing. Kindness was still worth fighting for. The Kindness Center continued to operate, but the challenges did not stop. Every day brought new hurdles, disagreements with city officials, complaints from neighboring businesses, and the constant struggle to keep funding steady. Some days, Robert looked as exhausted as he had when he was still lost in the park, only this time, it wasn't because he didn't know who he was. It was because he knew exactly who he wanted to be, but the world kept making it difficult for him. Leah saw it all. She saw the long nights Robert spent at his desk, surrounded by papers. She saw Eleanor and Richard arguing over how much more money they could pour into the foundation before it became unsustainable. She saw her mother standing by Robert's side, encouraging him when he felt like giving up. And she saw the people who needed the center, the ones who had nowhere else to go, the ones who had lost their homes, their jobs, or even their families. She also saw the ones who didn't believe in the mission. One afternoon, as she and Sophia arrived at the center, they were met with an unwelcome sight: protesters. A small group of them stood outside, holding signs that read, "Clean up the city. No more handouts. Our neighborhood isn't a shelter." Leah's heart pounded. She had never seen people protest kindness before. Robert was already outside, speaking calmly with one of the protesters, a middle-aged man in a business suit. The man's voice was sharp. "You're making it worse. This center is bringing them here. They have nowhere else to go," Robert replied evenly. "That's not our problem," the man snapped. "We worked hard to live in a nice area. We don't want people camping out in front of our businesses, scaring customers away." Leah felt her stomach twist. Before she could stop herself, she stepped forward. "Do you think they want to be here?" she asked, her voice loud enough to carry. The man turned to her, frowning. "Excuse me? These people," Leah said, gesturing toward the center. "Do you think they chose to be homeless? That they like sleeping outside and being hungry?" The man hesitated, clearly caught off guard by the sight of an 8-year-old questioning him. "I didn't say that. But that's what you mean," Leah said stubbornly. "You think the center is the problem, but the real problem is that people need help and no one wants to give it." Robert looked at her with quiet pride, but he let her speak. "You're mad because you don't want to see it," Leah continued, her small fists clenched at her sides. "You want people to go away so you don't have to feel bad. But ignoring something doesn't make it disappear." A murmur rippled through the small crowd. Some of the protesters shifted uncomfortably. A few even lowered their signs. The businessman's face darkened. "Look, kid, I get it. You want to help. But this is our neighborhood, and we have a right to feel safe." Robert finally stepped in. "And don't these people have the right to feel safe too?" The man opened his mouth, then shut it. For a moment, he looked like he wanted to argue, but instead, he turned and walked away. The remaining protesters lingered, uncertain, before one by one, they began to leave. Some stayed behind, looking thoughtful. Leah exhaled, realizing her heart was still pounding. She hadn't meant to get involved. She had just spoken the truth. Sophia placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. "I'm proud of you," she whispered. Robert knelt beside Leah, his expression full of warmth. "You have no idea how much that meant." Leah shrugged. "I just said what you always say." Robert chuckled. "Then I guess we make a good team." The protest had shaken them all, but it had also proven something. Not everyone would support what they were doing. But that didn't mean they would stop. Standing firm wasn't always easy. But it was always worth it. The days grew colder as autumn settled into the city. The leaves turned from green to golden brown, and a crisp chill filled the air. The Kindness Center remained busy, with more people arriving each day, seeking warmth, food, and a fresh start. Despite the struggles, Robert, Leah, and Sophia continued to push forward, refusing to let the negativity stop them. Then, one afternoon, as Leah was helping organize supplies, Robert called for everyone's attention. "I have an idea," he announced. Sophia raised an eyebrow. "Should I be worried?" Robert grinned. "Not at all. I want us to host a Thanksgiving dinner." The room went quiet. "A Thanksgiving dinner," Eleanor repeated, folding her arms. "For whom?" "For everyone," Robert said. "The people we help, the volunteers, the neighbors, anyone who needs a warm meal and a place to belong." Richard looked skeptical. "That's a great sentiment, son, but do we even have the resources for something like that?" Robert nodded. "If we all pitch in, I think we can pull it off. We'll ask for donations, recruit volunteers to cook and serve, and make sure no one in this community goes hungry on Thanksgiving." Leah's face lit up. "That sounds amazing." Sophia, though still cautious, smiled. "It does. But pulling it off won't be easy." Eleanor sighed, but there was admiration in her voice. "You never do take the easy route, do you?" Robert grinned. "Nope." And just like that, preparations began. The next few weeks were a whirlwind of activity. Flyers were posted all over the city, calling for volunteers. Local grocery stores donated ingredients. Restaurants pitched in with extra supplies. Some people laughed at the idea, a Thanksgiving dinner at a homeless shelter, but others saw it for what it was, a chance to bring the community together. Leah helped wherever she could, stacking canned goods, setting tables, even tasting some of the food when the cooks needed a second opinion. She watched as the center transformed, tables lined up in rows, each covered with white cloth and set with plates and silverware. As Thanksgiving approached, the excitement in the air grew. And then, the big day arrived. By noon, people began gathering outside the Kindness Center. Some were the regulars, men and women who had been coming to the shelter for weeks. Others were families struggling to make ends meet, children clinging to their parents' hands. There were elderly folks, lonely and looking for company, and volunteers ready to serve. Then, to everyone's surprise, more guests arrived. Neighbors. Shop owners. Even a few of the city officials who had once hesitated to support the center. Leah watched in awe as people who would have never spoken to each other before now sat side by side, sharing a meal. She and Sophia helped serve plates, moving between tables, smiling as they watched people laugh, talk, and for the first time in a long time, feel like they belonged somewhere. At one point, Leah spotted a familiar face near the doorway, the businessman who had led the protest weeks ago. He wasn't holding a sign this time. He wasn't scowling. Instead, he was just watching. Then, slowly, he stepped inside. Leah didn't say anything. She simply grabbed a plate, walked up to him, and held it out. For a moment, he hesitated. Then, with a small nod, he took it. Leah grinned. "Happy Thanksgiving." The man exhaled, shaking his head with something like amusement. "Happy Thanksgiving, kid." As the evening went on, Robert stood at the front of the room, tapping a spoon against his glass. "I just want to say thank you," he said, his voice carrying through the hall. "To everyone who made this possible. To every volunteer, every donor, and every person who walked through those doors today." He looked at Leah, his expression full of warmth. "And to the girl who reminded me that even the smallest act of kindness can change everything." Leah felt her cheeks heat up as everyone clapped, her heart swelling with happiness. Sophia squeezed her shoulder. "You proud of yourself?" Leah smiled. "Yeah, I think I am." As she looked around the room, at the people smiling, the warmth in the air, the way strangers had become family, she realized something. This wasn't just about food. It was about belonging. It was about kindness. And it was about proving that no matter how divided a community might seem, there was always a way to bring people together. One meal at a time. The success of the Thanksgiving dinner was greater than anyone had imagined. What had started as a simple idea to feed the hungry had turned into something far bigger, a moment that united people from all walks of life. And as Leah walked through the Kindness Center the next day, watching volunteers clean up and guests lingering in warm conversation, she realized that something had shifted. People were beginning to see. The ones who had turned away before were now looking closer. The ones who had doubted the purpose of the center were now reconsidering. The ones who had whispered about Leah and her mother behind their backs were now asking how they could help. It wasn't just about the food or the event. It was about changing minds. And it was working. A few days after Thanksgiving, Robert received a phone call from a local news station. They want to do a segment on the Kindness Center, he told Eleanor and Richard, rubbing the back of his neck. They say they want to highlight the impact we're making. Eleanor hesitated. That could be good, but also risky. Sophia, who had been listening from the kitchen, frowned. How so? Richard exhaled. Public attention can be a double-edged sword. Some people will love what we're doing, but others, well, they'll find a way to twist it. Robert nodded, deep in thought. I think it's worth the risk. If people see what's really happening here, maybe they'll understand. Maybe we can get more support. Sophia crossed her arms. As long as they don't make Leah the center of the story again. She didn't sign up to be a celebrity. Robert smiled at Leah. No cameras for you. Just the work. Leah grinned. Good. And so, the news crew arrived the following week. They filmed the volunteers serving food, interviewed some of the people the center had helped, and captured Robert speaking about his journey, from being lost to finding purpose again. By the time the segment aired, something incredible happened. The donations that had slowed down? They picked up again. The volunteers who had trickled out? They returned, bringing friends. The skeptics who had doubted the Kindness Center's mission? Some of them started changing their minds. But not everyone was happy. A few days after the news aired, a letter arrived at the center. It wasn't a donation. It wasn't a thank you note. It was a notice. The city council is reviewing our permit. Robert read aloud, his voice growing tense. Sophia grabbed the paper, scanning it. What does that mean? It means, Richard said grimly, they're reconsidering whether this center should exist. Leah's heart dropped. What? Why? Robert's jaw clenched. Because people are still complaining. Some businesses don't like having the homeless nearby. They think we're bringing them here. Leah's stomach twisted. But that's not fair. Robert exhaled. I know. Eleanor placed a hand on her son's arm. This isn't the end, Robert. We'll fight this. Leah looked between the adults, her fists clenched. They had worked so hard. They had helped so many people. And now, it might all be taken away? Sophia knelt beside her daughter, smoothing her curls. Don't worry, baby. We're not giving up. Leah swallowed hard. We can't. Because this wasn't just about them anymore. It was about every person who had walked through those doors. And Leah refused to let them be forgotten again. The threat of the city council revoking the Kindness Center's permit loomed over them like a storm cloud. It wasn't just a legal issue, it was a challenge to everything Robert, Leah, and the volunteers had worked for. If the permit was revoked, the center would be forced to close. And if that happened, where would all the people who relied on it go? For the first time, Leah saw Robert truly worried. Not just tired, not just frustrated, but afraid. This place is all some of them have, he murmured late one evening as he sat in the quiet office of the center. If they shut us down? Leah sat across from him, swinging her feet. They won't. Robert gave her a tired smile. You sound awfully sure about that. Leah shrugged. We just have to show them why we matter. Robert exhaled. And how do we do that? Leah thought for a moment, then grinned. Easy. We show them what kindness does. The next morning, Sophia, Eleanor, and Richard joined Robert in an emergency meeting at the Kindness Center. Volunteers gathered, worried but determined. Leah sat quietly in the corner, listening. The city council meeting is in 2 days, Richard announced. That's when they'll make their final decision. Sophia crossed her arms. So we have 2 days to convince them to let us stay. Robert nodded. We need people to speak on our behalf, residents, volunteers, anyone who believes in what we're doing. Eleanor sighed. That might not be enough. The businesses that are complaining have money and influence. That's hard to fight. The room fell silent for a moment. Then Leah stood up. Then we fight with what we do have, she said firmly. Robert looked at her, intrigued. Which is? Leah's eyes shined with determination. The people we've helped? For the next 2 days, Leah, Robert, and the volunteers worked tirelessly. They reached out to the people who had been impacted by the center, men and women who had once been homeless but now had jobs, families who had found stability, elderly individuals who had regained hope. And when the city council meeting finally arrived, they weren't alone. A crowd gathered outside the government building, holding signs that read, "The Kindness Center saved my life. Helping people is not a crime. Kindness over politics." Inside, the council chamber was packed. On one side, business owners and residents who wanted the center gone. On the other side, volunteers and supporters who refused to let it be erased. Leah sat beside Sophia, gripping her mother's hand tightly. Then, Robert stood up. For the next 20 minutes, he spoke, not just about his own journey, but about the hundreds of lives the Kindness Center had touched. He spoke about people who had been given second chances, about meals that had saved lives, about warmth in a world that often felt too cold. Then, one by one, people stepped forward to tell their stories. A man who had once been jobless and hopeless, now employed and stable. A mother who had lost everything but found shelter and support at the center. A teenage girl who had been kicked out of her home but had found safety within the walls of the Kindness Center. Even some of the volunteers spoke, talking about how giving had changed their own lives. Leah watched the council members closely. Some looked unmoved. But others, they were listening. Finally, the time for arguments ended. The council members whispered among themselves, then called for a vote. Leah held her breath. One by one, the votes were cast. And when the final decision was announced, Robert's breath caught in his throat. The Kindness Center was staying. Cheers erupted in the room. Leah jumped up, hugging her mother. Robert was swarmed by volunteers, his face filled with relief. They had won. Not because they had the most money. Not because they had the most influence. But because kindness had spoken louder than fear. A week later, the Kindness Center was busier than ever. More volunteers had signed up. More donations had come in. And, to Leah's delight, even some of the people who had once opposed the center were now offering their support. Leah and Robert sat outside on a park bench, watching as families and volunteers moved in and out of the center's doors. "You did something incredible, you know," Robert said, smiling at her. Leah shrugged. "So did you?" Robert chuckled. "Yeah, but you were the spark." Leah tilted her head. "Mom says kindness spreads. Like a ripple." Robert nodded. "She's right." Leah watched the sunset, her heart full. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, how everything had started with a simple sandwich. Then she turned to Robert, her voice soft. "Do you think the world is a little bit kinder now?" Robert smiled, the warmth of it reaching his eyes. "Yes, Leah," he said. "Because of you." And as Leah looked around at the center, at the people who had found hope, at the volunteers who had made a difference, she knew one thing for sure. Kindness was powerful. And it could change the world. One small act at a time.